Donne here, and today we are going to be talking about how to come up with a great book title. There is an art and a science to coming up with great titles, and as much as there's not always ultimate pressure on you to find the perfect title, as if you are pursuing traditional publication, a lot of times they will change the title. Nonetheless, if you are self-publishing, it's on you to come up with those titles, and it can honestly help you in queries and even with selling, though at least then you have your agent to kind of weigh in. It can help if you have a stronger title that immediately tells a reader what kind of book it is, the category, the genre, kind of gives a sense of intrigue and action. And so what I'm gonna do is kind of go over what you have to consider when you're thinking of titles. I'm gonna go over a ton of different real examples across genres so you can kind of see some of the different constructions and ways to approach titles. It's all word play, it's all word art. And then I'm going to give you literal practical tips on how to actually brainstorm and come up with title options. So why do titles matter? Because titles are essentially marketing. And just like a cover or blurb copy, but really more important than blurb copy, a cover and a title work in concert to say to a potential reader what the book is. And this is why bad covers or bad titles are just inappropriate either way, can do disservice to a book. It can lead to a book essentially never finding its target readership. This is why you have to know the both currently popular and kind of generally accepted title conventions for your chosen category and genre. You're going to have to be well read, or at the least do a ton of research. You want to make sure that your book basically both fits in and stands out at the same time. So really I'm going to mix this up because tip number one is literally you have to study recent and popular title trends in your chosen category and genre. This can be practically as simple as browsing Goodreads. There are lots of lists for upcoming debuts or books from certain categories. I wouldn't just look at upcoming, I'd look at the past couple of years. You're gonna wanna look at a 2 to 3 year window, and I do advise that does also look a bit forward. So maybe you really wanna look at a 3 to 4 year window, 2 years, so the current year, last year, and 2 years coming out, thereabouts. You can also browse Amazon, of course, but that's really only going to show you books that are currently released, and you can't just browse, say, bestsellers, because very often older titles, literally older titles, that are hyper popular are on the bestseller list, and while it's good to know what the hyper all-time bestsellers of genres are, you still have to be pretty aware of current trends as well. Sometimes those big, popular, older books actually kill title trends because they basically squat on and pee on a certain type of really distinctive title, and you can't do it because you look like a copycat. And really, aside from literal research, I really hope you read in the category and genre that you are writing in. That's honestly the easiest first step. If you are a regular reader, if you are selecting books to read, think about the titles that are catching your eye. What is it about them? Like, sit down and think about it. And when I go over examples, this will maybe help you start to pinpoint what they're doing. Think about what they're doing and think about whether that same approach is going to be effective for you. As you're reading and researching, I hope trends start to emerge and become clear to you. Like in your category, it's all short and pithy and, lots of adjective noun combinations. Or maybe in your category, it really works that the title is a singular noun. It's the name of a character. High concept premise titles. Like you start to get a sense of what is en vogue in your genre/category. Though I keep saying that because I have to allow for definitely adult titling versus YA titling versus definitely middle grade titling different. There will often be titles someone will have and I'll go, that sounds middle grade, not YA. Your title can literally sound a little too cutesy or juvenile for the current kind of accepted norms of YA publishing. Like you wouldn't have a book called Ella Enchanted. That's definitely a middle grade title, or Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. But really what's more important than category, but category is important, is genre, because title trends do shift and change within genre. So let's say in YA, you're not going to give a name to your fantasy that you would also give to a contemporary thriller. The titles are almost never going to sit side by side and be similar, because that would be confusing. Though, hey, I can go on a whole rant about YA contemporary titles that use space words, and so thus sci-fi books can't use those words or titles. I have so many feelings about that. Yeah. And so within these things, as you are looking at titles, I want you to, I guess this is tip number 2, but it's all folded under the research you are going to do. Make a list of titles that stand out to you, titles that you like. Look at your bookshelf and look at the literal function of the words. As we go over the examples that I have, I'm going to call out the parts of speech and the ones that are smushed together and the different kinds of like title types. And you'll notice common trends about descriptive words, especially descriptive nouns, action verbs, adjectives or nouns that are specifically popular in genres and subgenres. Again, it's all wordplay. So you do have to get a little bit analytical about literally how the parts of speech function within the title, the feelings they evoke, the kind of imagery, and what they say about a book. For example, one big thing that I noticed, again, it's going to be in the examples, a common thing in a lot of title trends is the use of the oxymoron. A title that has two conflicting ideas, it's usually 2 words, not just 2 conflicting ideas, but that play against each other. And the reason it works as a title, as a piece of marketing, is when you see something like, I've got one behind me. This is actually on my examples list. So when you see something like Wicked Saints, you go, those are 2 conflicting ideas. This gives me kind of a creepy, edgy tone. I wonder what that is about. And specifically using the word saint, when you think about, I'm going to talk later about keywords, but keywords that you come up with for your book, a lot of religious stuff in this book, literal saints as well. And so this is a title that gives you a sense of tone and contrast, but also concept. So I'm going to jump into examples just because I have a lot of them, and I'm going to talk about some of these ideas as I go through them. I have a mix of genres here, and you'll kind of see how like in some of these title trends, you don't see any from one genre, you see heavy on another genre. Part of that is me finding it easier to find title examples for certain ones, but some of it is trends in the industry. And some of these titles I've pulled out are older. They're famous books I could think of that are indicative of a trend, but do your current research. This is not me giving you permission to use these kinds of titles. So first, some single word examples. Wool, legend, divergent, grown, slay, frostblood, wool sci-fi, legend. Actually, legend and divergent are just 2 of the YA dystopias I pulled out. That was a huge trend in YA dystopias for a long time. Single word titles are mostly out of favor in YA currently, except for I have these contemporary examples, grown, slay, strong specific words that evoke something and then play against a strong cover. Frostblood is a fantasy title, and it's a concept from the fantasy. Next is what I call single concept titles, where it's a concept from the book rather than a specific character, place, or item in the book, which I have separately. The Ivies is mine. This is a key story element, but it's also concept word play, where if you look at the actual premise of the book, I don't mean the Ivy League, I mean a group of girls, and it's meant to be a little play on it. It's meant to have a bit of edge, and it plays in concert with the cover, which I know you haven't seen. The Bells is another recent one that came to mind. It's a critical story concept, but it also plays into theme, beauty. The Cheerleaders by Kara Thomas, the Guest List recent thriller. It's the central kind of thing that adds a lot of tension to the book. The Cousins by Karen McManus. Again, this kind of central unifying concept hook. So next I have what I call phrase concept titles, where they're longer phrases or commonly used phrases that are used for the book. The Hate You Give, If I'm Being Honest, The Wife, Between Us, All the Pretty Things, Such a Fun Age, Perfect on Paper. These are just some examples. That's mostly YA contemporaries and some thrillers. Again, I find that those sorts of titles work very, very well in those genres. You're really not going to see titles like that for fantasy and sci-fi. There are always going to be exceptions. But you see what I mean with genre trends emerging as you look at common titles? Next, I call the promise of the premise titles, where the title, this is often used in thrillers, most often used in thrillers, which is why all three examples are thrillers. It's basically giving you a wink at the hook of the book. Sometimes I lie. This book has an unreliable narrator. One of us is lying. I'm not going to spoil the book, but if you've read the book, you have an idea on that one. And it's always the husband. Some of these they can be tongue-in-cheek, but they're meant to catch your attention, obviously, and then send you into the book kind of off-kilter as you read, because the title is indicating something's off. Promise of premise. Next, I have some character, place, thing titles, and I separated this out from the concept titles because these are more often seen in fantasy, sci-fi, and like lit fic, where it's like the title is a very important object, person, or place in the book. Jade City, the Goldfinch, the Wife, Gideon the Ninth. There's also main character plus premise titles. Again, this is gonna be, I got most of these from thriller, but sometimes these can work in fantasy as well, certainly YA. The Woman in Cabin 10, The Girl on the Train, The Wife Who Knew Too Much, which is also kind of a promise of the premise title, The Girl from Widow Hills, a little bit of that as well, The Girl of Fire and Thorns, and those are kind of building almost suspense and interest, because it's like, ooh, central protagonist, but like, what does this other thing mean? The next one is very obscure, but I didn't want to not mention it because every once in a blue moon, this is actually another kind of squatters' right one. It's so niche and doesn't always work that once a book kind of does this successfully, it's hard for other books to do it because these tend to be a little wordy. They tend to be harder to remember except for a few books. And I call these meta premise titles, like The Good Girl's Guide to Murder or Field Guide to the North American Teenager. I would say these are way harder to pull off and they can lean it to meta or cutesy. So as I said, like, they only work once in a blue moon. You're not going to be able to name your thriller The Good Girl's Guide to blank or The Mean Girl's Guide to whatever because it's been done. Because remember that titles are branding, so once one book does something very, very well, often it's not in your best interest to copy it. Sometimes that's the point because you want to benefit off of that readership, but it can just as easily work against you. So there are lots of different kind of approaches that you can take. Next is double nouns, and this was like all over YA for a while, specifically YA fantasy, but I've limited myself to two options, but I mean, they're big enough. Shadow and Bone and Serpent and Dove, but I know that you can think of a million others. We drop them in the comments for fun if you want. That was a huge trend in YA, but it's less of a trend now. Then the question is Serpent and Dove bringing it back? I suspect we are going to see a rise of that again. Next are just what I call noun-verb constructions. I used one of these. That's an inelegant title, but The Stars We Steal, We Hunt the Flame, Bright We Burn. And these have kind of like a command or an action kind of inherent in them, if that makes sense, and compare The Stars We Steal to We Steal the Stars, which was the alternate, which was actually the title I submitted. They're similar but slightly different, and you can and you should be playing with slight variations in how you reverse words and move them around and try them in a different context, as they're going to feel a little different depending on how you set up the words. Adjective noun examples, these are also very straightforward. I have a ton of these because I hesitate to say this is the most common title convention, but it might be, at least certainly in a lot of the genres that I pay attention to. I already mentioned Wicked Saints, which is playing off that oxymoron to grab your interest. Similarly, Big Little Lies did this. The lies are like, ooh, intriguing, but then you go Big Little and you're like, interesting. This Mortal Coil sci-fi, The Darkest Corners, thriller, The Cruel Prince, and you're like, ooh, Cruel Prince, and it gives you a sense of that specifically romance concept, which is interesting. The Safe Place, The Bone Houses, The Night Swim, The Unspoken Name, and I'll say The Bone Houses is a fantasy book, and that's also a concept in the book. That would kind of go under the people thing one as well. A lot of these can double as different kinds of titles. I have adverb, verb, or pronoun examples, noun, pronoun. Brightly burning was mine. Always, never yours is another, and that's an oxymoron. So they're less common, but there are lots of different ways to play on word function. Action or call to action examples, though I would say a lot of these have call to action in them, and that's a common like tension device you're gonna see, but I wrote down Aurora Rising. It's the main character, but it's a spacey word because we're gonna talk about keywords. Rising, it's just kind of like, that indicates an arc of some sort. And Ship It, which is like, it's a concept, but it's also like, do the thing. Next is what I jokingly call blank and blank and blank escalating word series. We see these so much in YA. A shadow, bright and burning. That's noun with escalating adjectives. There's something strange and deadly. A song of wraith and ruin. This too was a huge trend in YA for a while, mostly exclusively in fantasy. The succession of words trend. I imagine it will come back eventually, but what's tricky with those, they can start to feel like word soup, and the words can in fact start to feel almost interchangeable. I have found as a reader, fan with these, even I confuse the names of some of my favorite books because I'm like, what was the series of escalating word soup? So I think that's why they've slightly fallen out of favor, but one of the reasons they work obviously is you get to put more enigmatic, kind of tonal, provoking words that can draw a reader in, especially if it's playing off of a superb cover. There's also Blank of Blank, which is biggest in fantasy. A Game of Thrones, The Name of the Wind, The Way of Kings, The Prairie of the Orange Tree. Less common in some of the other genres. If you couldn't tell, I kind of added that section because I was like, oh, look at this fantasy title trend. So those are just some examples, a limited list of examples. Make your own examples list based on what you read, on what you write, and start to kind of pick apart the wordplay that other books do. Again, think about what those titles made you feel, the assumptions that you make about a book based on its title and whether it makes you want to read. Which brings us to the next critical tip, which is brainstorming a keyword list. You get to start playing with all the words. It is a brain dump step. I have done this on every book except for technically the IVs, because sometimes the title's gonna hit you like lightning out of nowhere, but very often you have to dig a little deeper to come up with your title. So I did this for both Brightly Burning and for The Stars We Steal. First, think about popular buzzwords for your genre. We joke about these and they do shift and change, but you're gonna know what a lot of them are. Blood, crown, fantasy, throne, really that's for like certain types of fantasies, or stars, science concept words. I mentioned aurora, gravity, though the asterisk there is that a lot of YA contemporary loves to use our space words. Contemporary, hearts, season, feelings, not like literal feelings, but like specific feelings, and specific seasons, like the summer of blah, blah, blah. Just like think about what are the buzzy words for your genre. This can help you actually avoid words when they're overused. Like every book coming out now seems like it has the word blood or fire in it. And so maybe you don't want to put blood or fire in your title because that's a lot of different books with similar words. You know what I mean? Think about theme related words. Like, I know this is heavy handed, but think about the theme of your book, concepts in your book. And I'm talking like literal word soup. So let's take The Stars We Steal. My brainstorm list had like stars, gravity, thieves, princesses, courtship. Like I was like spitballing BS, but also feelings. Actually, I did this for Brightly Burning. My character's bold. I wrote down the word bold. And like you kind of go from there. Concepts, themes, feelings that you want to evoke, feelings your characters have, character traits, personality traits. You can put down the keywords of character names, places, things that's going to work best for the genres that support that, like fantasy. You can also do the concept phrases, like short phrases, like idiomatic phrases that come to mind. You can also do it, this is the more labor intensive one. Do a comb through of your book. Note down lines that sound pretty, lines that sound fancy, phrases, things that you would want people to turn into quotes. Get help for this, by the way. You can get a CP to help you with this as they read. You can literally ask them to pull out words, phrases, sentences that they think are really interesting, and you're brain dumping into your document and start zhuzhing up and switching up words. So with The Stars We Steal, thieves led me to stealing, and there were stars, and I had other titles potentially for the book that involved words like hearts and colliding because I was thinking of gravity, and like you just want to spitball and try lots of phrases, reversing words, and putting in different prepositions and adverbs and adjectives, and it's okay if you think they're mostly garbage. Most of them are gonna suck. You're gonna feel really, really stupid, but you want as many as humanly possible. 40, 50, 60 word and phrase combinations, because then you're gonna show it to another person. That's phase 2. If you're agented, it's going to be your agent. Usually, at least in my experience, I never showed an editor my full brain dump because it can be overwhelming and too much, but my agent would look at my brain dump, contribute to my brain dump. We would literally do Google Docs and then narrow it down so that we would show the editor a nice pared down list that made it seem like we were so smart and on top of this, and look at these clever titles, and no one needs to know it took 60 different combinations to get there. You can show it to a CP. I in fact advise that you share it with trusted friends, especially those who have read the books. And the thing is, if you know that you are bad at titles, and you are allowed to be bad at titles, because marketing doesn't come naturally to everyone, just make sure you have a friend who's really good at it. Use them, use their skills, and see what they come up with. And then start kind of sectioning out your list. I always do this. I do like a contenders. I start cutting and pasting the ones where I'm like, okay, these are the ones I'm vibing off the most. And I start creating sections and moving things around. And it's kind of like the more you see something, you're either gonna love it or hate it more. And you're looking and you're looking. Now, if you are writing a series, this is where it's going to get much, much harder, because most series, smartly, are going to have title trends within the series. So the different books in your series are going to have patterns in the titles. Yeah, it kind of sucks. So once you come up with a concept, a wordplay concept, a form to one title, you should probably come up with the titles for the rest of the series, or at least be really confident that you can replicate it. So Wicked Saints, Ruthless Gods. I think the third one is Public, but like, I literally remember when Emily was coming up with the series titles, and it was years ago, she came up with all 3 with her publisher before even the first one was announced. And this is often a tack that writers and publishers can and should take with a series to make sure that they kind of go together. And especially if you're self-publishing, I think this is important because, again, titles are about branding and marketing. So make sure that your books, even if they're not directly related, but they're like companion novels or what have you, that they have kind of a similar feel to them. And then, of course, when you do your cover design, you're going to make sure they look like they go together. So your last step, because indeed this is mostly just research and brain dumping and trying lots of combinations and asking for help until you land on something you don't absolutely hate. So now you have to Google your potential titles. You have to Google them, and you need to search Amazon or the book retailer of your choice. I like Amazon because it seems like it has every book ever. For Google, you're looking to eliminate similar media titles. Do not give your book the same title as a well-known, popular movie or TV show. It doesn't matter if it's old. Some things are just so memorable that you can't get away with copying them. Sometimes you can, but what you don't want to have happen is you query someone and you have your title. Well, 2 things you don't want to have happen. You don't want it to be the name of a very obvious movie or TV show that kind of taints their first impression, because it's like they either expect it to be similar to that, or they're like, this person didn't do their research because they're copying something that is just so clearly this other thing. Similarly, that's why you search a book retailer of your choice. You have to make sure that there's no other book with your title. Not ever, but certainly not in your category/genre, and not recently. I've definitely seen this in Author Mentor Match, where someone submits a project that has the identical book title of a book that came out a year ago, and that is someone who isn't up on their genre/category and didn't do any research. It does give that first impression, whether it's fair or not, before they read your query, that you aren't well read in your category / you did not do your research. So that is a vital last step. You can repeat titles that people have used before. A book that came out 30 years ago, it's usually going to be fine as long as it's not insanely famous. So you don't get to name your book Beloved or The Time Traveler's Wife, because those books exist. I, in fact, found out way after the fact that Brightly Burning is the title of an older book. Brightly Burning was a title picked by my publisher, so it wasn't my job to go research it because it was my publisher's choice. So it is what it is. They're totally different genres and they're like 20 years apart, but like you can have that happen. Some books do repeat titles, but you have to look at your category, genre, and how famous the book is and how recently it was published. Actually, this reminds me of one category I didn't have on my titles list that I might as well bring up. So I accidentally realized after the fact, because it was like, you know how I mentioned it was like word soup? The title I submitted was We Steal the Stars, and my publisher reversed it to The Stars We Steal, and that's the title we went for. And then I was like, that's a lyric from The Greatest Showman. And clearly, as I was brainstorming and brain dumping, I had seen the movie recently and I did the reversal. I reversed the words. It was not the song lyric, and then it ended up that way anyway. Song lyrics and song titles is another popular thing to do, especially in YA contemporary. Tread carefully. So generally using song lyrics in books, period, you have to get permission for that, and often you have to actually pay to use song lyrics in your book, and that's a whole thing. With titles, I think if it's a little snippet and it's not recognizable and it's a perfectly reasonable combination of words that can be thrown together, it's fine. It was fine for my book, but I do know that Beth Revis, who wrote Across the Universe, and then her series titles are all Beatles lyrics from that song, she did actually get permission to do that. I don't know if that was just an extra due diligence step that she chose to do or if it was something she had to do, but that's just kind of a note. She used a very famous Beatles song, the title for the first one and then bits of lyrics for the next two, and to be safe, like, she got permission. So it is possible that if you do use a very, very famous song, sometimes I imagine there could be legal stuff, but that could also be a later problem. So just be careful with titles that are popular song titles / lyrics. So that is my primer on book titles, why they're important, some steps that you can take. Hopefully throwing out a million examples got your brain clicking a little, seeing some of the patterns, getting you to brainstorm about your own books. And then it's really all about the brain dump, the brainstorm. It's all word play. You have to bleh a bunch of words and concepts and thoughts and feelings and try to combine them in an interesting order for your title. I would love to know down below in the comments questions you have, tips you have for titling. Everyone has like a different way that they approach this. I actually enjoy titling projects, and I'm like really jazzed that the Ivies is like the title it had from the very beginning. That's always a really nice feeling when you land on the perfect title. And give this video a thumbs up if you like it. I'll make more kind of how-to type videos on publishing, and if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and happy writing.